Hello, and welcome to Teaching My Cat to Read, the very serious book review podcast. I'm Eli.
I'm Em.
I'm Rowan.
And I'm Lottie. And this week we're discussing everything about A Wizard of Earthsea by Ursula K. Le Guin. I don't know.
Le Guin.
I should hand it over to someone else.
It's fine. It's fantasy pronunciation. It's all,
exactly. I don't know someone's actual name. I feel I should get it right.
Le Guin did give us the very easy to say names of Ged and Sparrowhawk, which I'm so
Yes, I am all for.
Take now, Ogian. What the fuck is that? How am I supposed to say that
I
one?
had it, and now I can't. Ogian is how the audiobook says it.
I would go Ogian.
Yeah, my brain goes Ogian, and that's like the least awful option, but I hate all of them.
Yeah.
Which sucks because he's one of my favourite characters, but...
I would just say, dear listeners, at the start of this episode, I've massively sped read this book due to real life being busy, so, just FYI.
Fortunately, you have not been able to escape away to Earthsea.
No, it's sad.
Alas.
Be sad.
Alas. So I guess this is the first of a quartet of novels. So this the actual book, A Wizard of Earth. Quintet? Oh, okay. Well, I've got
tales,
before me.
Is there like a short story collection or something?
I think.
Let me go and get the physical book that I have. This is my fiance's copy, and it's called the Earthsea Quartet. And this is like and does it have?
Oh, so that one probably doesn't have the other wind.
It maybe does not.
So there's 4, and then there's the Tales of Earthsea, which is short stories, and then there's the other wind. Which
this
I
has
actually
A Wizard of
haven't read.
Earthsea, The Tombs of Atuan, The Farther Shore, and Tahani, which my mother wouldn't let me read as a child because it starts with like a young girl falling into fire and being horribly burned, which is like kind of facial disfigurement, kind of a theme actually. Because at one point the main character Ged becomes quite scarred by
magic,
summoning a spirit of the dead and unleashing evil into the world. But yeah, so this is the first
typical Friday night, you know.
Yeah. Your standard typical Friday night at a boys' wizarding school. Harry Potter wishes it could. Yeah, and I really liked this because I really love this book. This book is amazing. And so is all of Earthsea Quartet. But there was a quote that I read recently from Ursula K. Le Guin talking about how you don't need like a war or conflict between like the good side and the evil side to make an interesting narrative, and this is such a good example of that, I think.
We should that's probably a good cue for a terrible summary if anybody had any ideas.
I forgot about the terrible summary. How could I?
Like the only one I came up with was a spoiler, so I'll bring that up later, but I do quite like is it possible to sail off the edge of the world? Local wizards investigate.
I think it's just a hard to summarize book without spoilers.
Like, it's very well organized.
Yeah.
Like, it's very well structured, but it is a lot of, like, Ged potters around Earthsea. And also there are some, there's magic. I tell you what, actually, structurally, the thing it reminds me most of is Long Way to a Small Angry Planet. Mm-hmm. In that we're pottering along, we're on a bit of a journey, we meet a lot of interesting people, and... yeah, I don't know, just vibe-wise and structure-wise, they seem very similar. It's pretty chill. Although, actually, I mean, I guess, like, it gets progressively less chill, I guess, for
I
Ged
think my terrible summary would be like, well, if it isn't the consequences of my own hubris or something.
Yeah, that works.
Yeah, because I mean that's a slightly less kind way of going it. It's not just Ged pottering around; it's Ged making a series of quite large mistakes.
Oh yeah, no. So it's fun, isn't it? Because it is just like
I guess one big mistake,
and like the climactic drama sort of happens at the start, and then it is pottering around. It's like Ged makes a terrible mistake, and then potters around about it.
So I would say Ged makes a mistake at the beginning. He makes the mistake with the goats. This is our introduction to Ged making mistakes. And then he gets manipulated by the little sorceress girl into reading the book. Mistake number 2. Ogian has to come and save him. Then he gets goaded by Jasper into the big mistake. And that kills the Archmage who saves him. And then there's the whole thing with the kid. And like, you can see why he does it, but it's not a mistake,
It's
trying
true.
to go after that kid.
It puts his death back on his tail.
Yep, and he gets basically saved from that by the little village witch who knows to like, he looks dead, but let's not, burn his body yet. He's a wizard, and the little Otak who kind of basically cuddles him back to life.
Yeah.
So at one point he acquires a small fuzzy animal that rides around in his cape with him, and is his best friend. And then later on, the animal dies, and I had to go downstairs and hug the cat because I was so sad.
Yeah, that's like that one. Like that's probably like the least of his mistake. He kind of gets drawn into a trap, but like that's the one that feels like least his fault.
I tell you what, that
thing
is actually for me kind of marks a turning point where like all his previous mistakes are like him being not a dick exactly, but there are a lot of like, I am an arrogant fuckwit who isn't thinking this through. And, like, he very much thinks this mistake through, and it's a mistake that's made out of, like, of compassion and desire for his friend not to be hurt, which is quite a big shift from, I'll show them all.
Are we talking about we're talking about Petchfari's son here, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, there's definitely like the big mistake, like, his mistakes after that are not of the same type. He does learn his lesson.
Yes.
But he still, like, sails off to the end of the world, like, no, Vetch, do not come with me, I'll be fine by myself. But also, like, Vetch is like, let me come with you, I'll tell your story. And then it's like, actually, no, wait a minute, you might be dead, let me go die with you. Like, at one point.
I love Vetch. Vetch is great.
So we should probably talk about what Ged's big mistake is. And so basically, he is from this small island that's, like, mostly goat herders. And he is incredibly powerful wizard. Like, he's got incredibly powerful magic that he gets discovered by a local mage who turns out to be extremely cool, and then gets subsequently sent off to wizard school, and he basically ends up boasting about his powers and saying, yeah, I'll summon a spirit from the dead, what of it, yeah, like, get on my level, I'll do it. He swears it by his name, and something about the magic system in this one is that, like, true names of things are how you control them and how you can do true magic with them instead of just illusions. Anyway, so he swears by his name that he will do this thing. And then he summons the spirit of a legendary, like, woman from myth and song. But he also summons something else from beyond the veil that is now incredibly evil and in the world, and he has to deal with it. He has to put it back into the box.
Deal with the consequences.
Yeah, and what ends up happening is not that he puts it back into the box, but spoilers, it's his own death, and he has to accept it as part of himself, which I thought was such a nice, like, it was such a good illustration of, that thing that Ursula Guin has of, like, it doesn't have to be, he doesn't end up vanquishing the beast with power.
Yeah.
He does it by recognizing it as an aspect of himself that he's afraid of and that he's been running from.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's just really cool.
And I think that it's led to very well as well, because I think until about halfway through, I didn't really have an inkling of where it was going with it. And we didn't... One of the things I kind of liked about it was that it's quite... both in style and in terms of, like, the sort of detail that you get about systems. It's quite fairy tale. You don't have a lot of kind of... I understand the mechanics of spellcasting, and therefore I can see from what he's been taught in Roke how he's going to beat the shadow, blah, blah. But about halfway through, you start getting hints about its true nature and about what it is, and the way that it behaves starts to build towards this reveal. And I think it's just structured extremely well. Like, and every encounter he has teaches him something more about it or about himself in relation to it in a way that just leads really naturally into that conclusion. I really enjoyed that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I do think, like, the magic system in this is very fascinating. So you have this whole... I think Ged at one point basically says, like, the whole foundation of it is names. Like, there are other incantations, there are things you can do to binding, but it all seems to be, like, it all seems to come down to names in the end.
Yeah.
And the way that, like, when they go too far out on the sea, it just doesn't work anymore. It's like, I think there's the lines like, the fish don't know their own names, so you can't call them. Which I just find so amusing.
Off the edge of the map.
And it's such a nice take on that kind of like, that here there be dragons, except there aren't dragons. What there is just a bunch of nameless stuff that you can't... It's the edge of knowledge in a really literal way, which I really like.
But there's like there's a hint of the kind of like harder magic systems, because there's a thing when Ged's fighting the dragons, it's a thing of like he can't bind 3 of them because 2 are coming from the north and 1's coming from the south.
Oh yeah, and the spells only work in one direction. Yeah.
Yeah, but also like literally what he does is just sort of stop. Basically, like it's called binding, but I just imagine it as kind of like just folding up the wings, just wrap you up, like burritoing a cat, and then suddenly it just like plummets into the sea.
Yeah.
I tell you what, I kind of pictured it as them like hitting a wall and they run out of momentum and then they just.
But that is, it's quite a hard
Cartoon
magic
style.
system solution to a problem. It's not like, I know your name, dragon. It's, well, you have wings, so what if they don't work and now you're in the ocean?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's balanced very well, I think. It never feels
Yeah.
inconsistent. It just
No, that's the thing, it
feels
doesn't.
like you just don't have all the information and you're kind of okay with that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I really liked that in universe the magic system is, or like their knowledge of it is incomplete. So part of his training is that every winter he goes to this tower where he and like other students have to learn by rote like all of the names of various things, like the names of all the different seas and inlets and islands and towns, and but like not just what they're called, but like their true names. And there's this line where the mage who's in charge of teaching all of this says, like, many powerful wizards have spent their entire lives just trying to find out a single one of the names on this list, and this work will never be done until the ending of the world. And
Yeah.
I really liked that as a, you know, there's still new magic, or there's still things that are just, it will never be done because it's part of what the world is.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I liked it as a potential career option that's offered to Ged as well, that he's like,
Yeah.
one day, like if he really wants, he can just shut himself up in a tower and learn names until the end of time. And that would be a very, that would be a valid way to live. You know, he can sit on his island with his boat friends and mend their nets and make sure their boats don't fall apart and admire the flowers in the patch outside his house. And that's all that could be all he does for his life. And that's perfectly valid and like, it just feels good. There's lots of examples of that in the book where it's just
But
like, this would be a
also-
perfectly good way to spend your life.
We talked about him in opposition to these dragons that have been threatening a fishing village, which is his first sort of assignment after he becomes a wizard. And he kills a few of them by sending them into the ocean and they drown. And the biggest and most powerful one, what he actually does is he does a load of research and makes and forms a theory about that this dragon is actually a dragon of old that's sung about in tales, and thereby he knows its name. And he stakes his life essentially on the guess that this is actually that dragon's name, and he's right. And he's like 19 at this point or something.
Age of the geek, baby.
Well, yeah, but also like, you know, wizards might spend their entire lives to find out the name of a single thing, right? And he goes and finds out the name of a dragon and like puts it to use.
I think that's different because that's putting it to use. That's not finding it initially.
I guess, but it's used his noggin.
Yeah, he did use his noggin.
He didn't just use his sort of raw magical power that he has.
Yeah. Like, I do like that none of the conflicts are really solved by, I have a bigger magical hammer and I'm going to hit you with it.
Yeah.
No, the problems are created by I have a big magical hammer.
Yes. Yeah.
That's true, yes.
Because there is this whole thing, like, Ged does have a bit of, like, a chosen one story. There's this whole thing about Ogion going, he is incredibly powerful. He's from Guin, which is kind of known to create great wizards. And when he meets the Archmage, initially when he enters the school, it's like, he's basically proclaimed as an Archmage to be, which is true. And we kind of know that from the framing of the story.
Yeah, it's pretty much the first thing we learn about him, isn't it? Is that he's going to be an Archmage, but, like, there aren't any stories about the things that we're about to tell you in this story.
Yeah.
But, like, all the famous stuff came later, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And that is one of the interesting things about this set of books is that he isn't the focal character in the later ones.
Yes.
Okay.
And I would argue he is not the focal character by the end of this book, because I think I only really noted this point, but when he sails with Vetch on the end, so it's at the end he's been running from his shadow for ages, and he decides to turn and face it, and he's chasing it, and he eventually comes across his friend Vetch's island, and it's very cute and homey, and he gets like a little bit of like talking to normal people and meeting Vetch's brother, who's like the same age as him and 19, and going, look at this like innocent 19-year-old.
They're both looking at each other with envy.
Yeah.
Yeah, the other kid's like, oh, he's so cool, he's got wizardly powers and a facial scar, I wish I was that cool.
And gets like, what if I just did woodwork for the rest of my life? Wouldn't that be nice and chill?
I mean, that does sound like a great life, let's be honest. Like,
Yeah.
And like I love also like that. So Vetch is a character who Ged meets at like when he first comes to the wizard school, and just immediately as Vetch is established as like just a nice, kind person. And there's this great line where he's saying like, oh, Vetch had been there for 3 years already, and he thought nothing of like casting little magics, like a light to illuminate what, so that he could read in bed. But he had a greater unlearned power, which was the power of kindness. And I was just, I love it. I love Ursula Le Guin's writing.
Great.
Yeah,
Vetch is lovely.
Yeah, sorry. I'm interested in the whole Vetch is the protagonist secretly by the end thing. Tell me more.
Absolutely.
Because it's I technical this, but it's like third person, isn't it, a whole thing? But you often get those little kind of like Ged thought, Ged saw, and as Vetch sails with Ged at the end, you get a lot more Vetch thought, Vetch saw, and a lot less of Ged's point of view. And I think it works really well to make you worry. It's like, and you know he's going to come back, but it's also like, is he going to come back? Because Vetch seems to be telling this story now.
Yeah. And that's what he promised to do if Ged didn't come back.
Yeah. And I think it also just allows you to have the moment at the end where he meets the spirit is kind of told externally. Like, you get a description of it, but you don't... The details of it are still lost a little bit, in the same way that the details of the magic system are kind of fuzzy. Yeah. But in a way that works, and I think that's quite good.
And I think that's it's kind of because it's between him and himself, right? So like the narrative sort of supports that, but it's also like I'm thinking kind of about like radical acceptance, and I'm guessing like the blurb talked about Ursula K. Le Guin's interest in Buddhism a lot, but I'm wondering if there isn't a certain amount of like that moment of reckoning with the things that you're afraid of, and like the dark side of yourself or your shadow, whatever, is going to be so deeply personal and like complicated, and like if you were going to do it from Ged's point of view, like what would you even say?
Yep.
You know, how would you detail that more effectively than by having Vetch from the outside look at what's happening? And like, I think pretty much all they say is like Ged called it by his name and he called him, you know, they call each other Ged, and then you're like, oh shit, and that's the last you kind of see of the actual confrontation.
Yeah.
And it's done so well, and you don't need any of that like I'm going to go into deep psychological detail about what this entailed and how you were feeling about it, which I mean I think is the strength of the book as a whole, right? And like the way it's narrated is that kind of like I guess I want to say economy, but that's not quite right. But there's a lot of space in it. It lets you come to your own conclusions.
What's like the art form called? Is it Impressionism? It's you make the shape of the thing, and
everybody
Impressionism,
like the detail. Yeah.
It's almost that in some ways, I guess.
Which I think is how fairy tale as a style kind of works generally, isn't it? Because you can't have all the detail. You don't locate it specifically. It's got to be like, you know, in a land of myth and a time of magic, so to speak.
Which is not to say that this book doesn't have details, because it has details and I love them.
But they're the personal details that like they make the characters more real and they make the places feel more real, but they don't it's not about like the underlying mechanics of the world or anything. It's about you know
I wonder if maybe what I'm thinking of instead is, and it's a concept I was introduced to only recently and I'm still trying to like integrate it in my view of how like reading and writing work, but the like narrative distance, like we're not sitting on anybody's shoulder in this. Like I don't think it very rarely says so and so felt X, or a lot of the things from like Ged's, you're not getting direct, this is stream of consciousness, this is what this person is thinking. You're left to infer that from the things that they do and the way they behave. And
instead of saying like Ged worried about the people on the island that he washed up on, like, so there's this bit where he washes up on an island and there are these two elderly people who he doesn't share a language with, and they crop up in later books, or they are relevant in some of the later books, but it doesn't talk about exactly how he feels toward them, but it talks about how he acts towards them, and that he's gentle, and that he lays a spell on the little the spring water that they have there to make it be less brackish and salty, and you know, like to try and help them as best he can. And it actually, I think, paints a much clearer picture of it's not only how he feels but what he's doing with it.
Correct me if I'm wrong, is it a young adult but / children's book, or is it aimed at a more older audience? Because like if you,
I read it as a young adult.
If you compare it to say The Hobbit as like a young a young child, like a young adult fantasy novel, because you were talking about descriptive novels, and like for me, I think, I mean, big Wheel of Time / Sanderson fan. Like I love a hard magic system, so some of the stuff where it wasn't fully revealed, I found a bit hard to not read, but I hadn't read something like that before. But I agree with everything you're saying. I think,
I would say it's between them in both the ways of like we say, it hints at a hard magic system, but it's definitely a soft magic system like Hobbit.
Yeah.
In terms of what you as the reader experience.
Yeah.
I think you could read this to quite a young child, but you wouldn't give it to a young child to read.
Yeah.
But I think if by the time you're like sort of say 12, you could probably read this by yourself.
Yeah.
There's a few bits like the little details of everyday life that like a very small child might just find a bit boring.
Yeah.
So you want to get like a little bit more mature.
Reading it now as like 26 years old and reading like young Ged going off to magic school and instantly getting into this rivalry with a guy and being hot-headed and hubristic because of it, it's like that reads differently to me now, and much more, I don't know.
I am much more sympathetic towards Jasper now.
Yeah, exactly. Like, whereas I think when I read it as 13 or 14 or something, I think I would have had a really different perspective on it than I do now, because now I'm just like, he's a child, he's a hothead, and he's being a dickhead.
Yeah.
And I think probably when I was like 13 or 14, I would have been a lot more sympathetic to Ged rather than Jasper.
Yeah.
So there's because it's a book written by an adult with a perspective, like writing about sort of young adults and children, and writing about them being childish in some ways, or particularly Ged. Like,
because that's the thing. Like, I think when I read it initially, I was like, Jasper's a dick. You can absolutely see why Ged's doing this, even though it's going to go wrong. And then you read it now, and you're like, Jasper is like a bit of an arse. He's really not.
Didn't really do that much wrong. Yeah.
He didn't do that much wrong, and you can kind of see how Ged, like, nice and folksy ways, but also like, you can see how what he says comes across as rude to Jasper, who's been raised in polite society. Even like he makes no attempt to meet Jasper halfway. I mean, Jasper isn't trying very hard either, but it's just like you know.
But Ged's immediately on the defensive.
But also like coming at it from like as an adult, you look at Jasper and you go, this is more about him than it is about Ged, right? Pretty much all the ways he's being an asshole. It's a lot clearer from an adult perspective that like this is more about Jasper and Jasper's own insecurities
exactly
than it is about anything that like Ged is doing wrong, or even any like there's no real personal like hatred there really.
But that's stuff that you might miss reading it as a young adult rather than reading it as an adult.
It's interesting because this is the first time I read it, and now I'm kind of wondering if I'd read it as a teenager, how much I would have empathized with Ged, because I think I would have, and I think I would have that kind of sense of like, I am the smartest in the room and nobody appreciates me, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Teenage M would have enjoyed that a lot more than adult M. So that's kind of interesting to think about.
So I don't know that I would call it it's definitely not a children's book. Although again, you might read it to a child. But it definitely deals with some like, I guess, deep stuff. Like he's running from his own death, and his death was brought into the world by his hubris and his, it's sort of, there's like philosophy you can do about the themes in this book,
but it's
that would pass you by completely.
Just abstract enough that I think a child could have a nice story about a shadow monster. That
Lottie, because you brought up Brandon Sanderson, and something that reminded me of the magic system in The Emperor's Soul actually was that it comes up a couple times in the book that all the different, so like there's an archipelago that a lot of this is set in, and all of the different islands, like where you go, the magic varies subtly between them. And one of the characters later on in the book, Fetch, mentions that like there are spells he learned in Roke that he can't do in his home island, and there's some stuff he does in his home island that would never work in Roke. And that I really liked that as a sort of way of being like, each place has its own ways, and that that's true of the magic as well as the society and
it kind of being tied to the earth.
Yes, well, there's one line where it says evil is of the earth. Evil doesn't exist on the ocean. Evil is of the earth, which I thought was really interesting, and I want to know more about where that comes from in her writing.
I think it hints at a kind of entropy versus like chaos
order?
versus order thing, and order being evil and
evil
chaos.
cannot exist in chaos. It can only exist in order. Like, it needs order in order
That
to
kind
be
of
evil.
it's something in that kind of vein, yeah. But I haven't reread the later books recently enough to kind of.
I think what it's reminding me a bit of is that kind of like, is it Gnosticism where they have that thing where like being embodied was actually the original sin? Like that like we are. That creation was an evil act, essentially, and before that we were all, like, untrammeled and, like, we weren't attached to the flesh or to earth, or, you know, we were, like, luminous beings, not this crude matter, kind of
floating around.
And actually that's what we should be trying to get back to, and I'm feeling that a little bit with the whole, like, evil is of the earth thing.
Yeah.
Is there's, like, an untrammeled freedom of the ocean versus, like, this kind of solid dirt situation.
I watched a film recently called Melancholia, which is, a really depressing film, and it's split in two parts. In the second part, a exoplanet is on its way to destroy the Earth, and
as you do,
people don't know about it until the last minute because of a cover-up. They think it's only going to do a flyby. Anyway, and this one character who in the first half you see has got, like, manic depression, says something about, like, existence is evil. Like, the planet that's coming to destroy us is good because just it's evil to be alive and to be a person inherently, and it just reminded me of that, because I wonder if I'm going to go and look at the TV trope Spectrum Melancholia and see that it's inspired by Gnosticism or something, or like that character.
Yeah.
What one thing that I just like, I guess in terms of fantasy in general, we mentioned it earlier, like the sort of the chosen one and how that fits in. I mean, for me, like Wheel of Time, Ragnar Thor is the chosen one. He's going to save the world. You kind of get that a bit of a vibe with some of Sanderson's book, like for example Final Empire. Vin's set up as or Kelsiar's, both of them set up as sort of the saviour of this world, and everything's on their shoulders. So what do you think about that in terms of this book in particular?
There is a bit where he is being told that he is a chosen one by people who do not wish him well. So there's this episode where he ends up being taken to this place that with this beautiful young wife of an elderly lord, and she's trying to convince him to, like, go and touch this evil stone in their basement. Like, calm down, I promise I've got the good wines down there.
I'm just picturing the Finding Nemo, like, touch the butt situation.
Anyway, and Ged goes into this basement with her that's, like, under lock and key, and she's like, oh, do you see it? And it's like this one stone in the middle of the floor of this, like, paved floor that's like, hey, I'm evil. Hey, I'm rendered in much more detail than all the other stones around me, and also I'm evil. Anyway, and she's trying to convince him that he's, like, a chosen one who's the one who can tame the evil that lives within this stone that's under, like, so many layers of, and it's, I don't know if it's clear whether or not that what she's saying has any truth to it, but he wants none of it. He's just like, not only do I not want to do this, I don't think I have the power to do this, and I can't help you.
Well, like, her actual plan is that he will get taken over, and then they'll let the Shadow in, and the Shadow will fuse with him, and they'll have both him and the Shadow under their control of the stone.
Yeah, it's never really made clear in the book, like, what the fuck is going on there? It's a kind of this weird, like, Tom Bombadil-esque moment where it's like, hey, here's a great power that's unrelated to the previously established magic system that, like, could be considered quite threatening, actually. Yeah. And I want to read the rest of the quartet.
I will never mention it again.
Well, I can't remember if it comes back up.
I don't think it does.
I don't know if it was intended as a Bombadil-esque, like, there are meant to be unanswered questions, because, like, that was kind of explicitly what
it's
Bombadil
a much
was
more
about.
Thematically relevant unanswered question than Tom Bombadil.
Yes.
But yeah, the other side of him being the chosen one is like the wizard school, and it kind of leading to his downfall. But I do like the way that it just kind of ends up not mattering. Like, he does go on to do great things, but there's no great thing he's going to defeat. It's just that he's going to be a powerful wizard, and part of him learning to be that great man is making the mistakes. Because definitely Ged, when you see him in the later books,
he's been shaped by this.
He's been shaped by it, and it's not the powerful magics he can do that seem to be the most important thing.
It's almost like he gets more like O'Gaian the further you get through.
Yes.
Yeah.
Like, hands down, my favourite character.
I adore him.
Oh, the bit where he goes back. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. It's just like, it's so good. It's like I didn't realise I was hoping for that to happen until I was reading it. And then it was so cathartic that he had gone back to his old master, and like he was what was it? They said there were few men on Roke who could have. So basically, Ged spent too long in the body of a hawk, and he has trouble coming back.
There were few men in the archipelago that could have brought him back to his true form, and only one on Gaunt. And it was just like he instinctually went back in the even though his mind was turning into the mind of a hawk because he'd spent so long in that shape. He just manages to hold on to the thought of I shall go home, and that is where home is.
Like I know where I will be safe and somebody who can help me, and I love that so much. And like the other thing I would like to point out about this book, zero romance. I was just thinking about like
delicious.
that as a form of love, and the love that he has for his master, for Guin, and that like and vice versa,
and for Vetch and for the Otak, and
exactly. And it's just like complete. There's not a single romantic love plot line in this book, and you don't miss. I didn't miss it at all. It only just occurred to me that that's the case.
There's another, because the other big sacrifice is the Archmage dying for him, and I found that because I don't read that as he's going to be a great wizard and so I shall save him.
I read it as he's a student and I'm here to protect him. Like that's what Dumbledore should have been.
It's like
this is my duty.
Like again, it's a duty and a form of love of like I will like we are the old ones, we are looking over them and we will protect them even from themselves.
It's not about being chosen, it's about choosing.
Right.
I was actually thinking I'm getting big Granny Weatherwax vibes out of this discussion. Like the fact that
Ogion and Granny Weatherwax would get on so well.
But also like the thing of like she's one of the witches that didn't get chosen, right? That's the thing. And so Granny Weatherwax is a witch in Discworld. She's like she's the leader of all the witches, the leader of the witches that the leader that they didn't have, because witches don't have leaders. They're very individualistic. But Granny Weatherwax is the most respected leader of the witches that they didn't have. Anyway, and like there's this whole thing about how you get chosen to be a witch, but Granny Weatherwax didn't. She chose. She like camped out in like the back garden of like a senior witch until they let her in, you know?
Yeah,
I love that.
Like, and I got that vibe, like all of the kind of crucial moments in this story, like there's an emphasis on Ged choosing to go to Roke when he could. It's just as valid an option, and maybe would have been safer if he'd decided to stay with Ogion and learn Ogion stuff, but he didn't. It's all about decisions that Ged makes, not about other people choosing him or some great destiny choosing him, and I really like that.
Well, when he comes back to Ogion's, like, Ogion gives him advice. He doesn't tell him what to do, but there's this bit where it's like Ogion had advised him not to change his form, and he valued that advice. And so this bit where it's like, okay, Ogion's just saying, here's what I think. And then Ged is like, I am going to choose to take this advice rather than being told what to do.
And this is still, like, again, reminding me very much of the Discworld witches. And there's this very much this thing of, like, you can't ask another witch to choose for you because they'd never respect you again. You wouldn't be a witch anymore if you asked other witches to make those hard choices for you. And sometimes it's a repeated theme with them. That's like, it's always a test, and it's only you have to live the rest of your life wondering how you did. And sometimes you can only choose between two forms of wrong, and a witch is the only one that can do that can do that. Yeah, I don't know. Choosing, it's important. Anyway, also the fact that like you lose your human mind if you go borrowing too long. The Falcon thing reminded me of that a bit.
Speaking of witches, we have to address the fact that there are like no women in this.
the only woman. Okay, so there's like
we've talked about one woman so far, I think.
So there's the nearby sorcerer's daughter while Ged is training with Ogion. Later turns out to be the beautiful woman who tries to get him to touch the evil stone. That's the same woman. So she's like a major antagonist. Or as far as there are antagonists in this, like human antagonists, she is one of them. You have Ged's aunt, who teaches him the beginnings of magic, and she's not wholly portrayed as sympathetic because she doesn't really give a shit about Ged, even though he's the son of her dead sister, until he starts showing sign of magic. She's sort of, she's a bit like cold in that way. But she does give him the tools to save his village from the attackers when the attacks come, which is like the reason that he then gets noticed as having magic powers and swept up on this adventure. And then
Vetch's
there is
sister.
Vetch has a
Vetch's sister.
That's, yeah.
Yeah. There's a Gauntish fisher wife who gives him some bread that he's very grateful for at one point. It's like there are not a lot of women in
There's
it.
a village witch in the town where he saves the kid.
Oh,
who
yes.
sort of looks after him
Oh,
a
well,
little
he doesn't
bit.
save the kid, right?
Where he doesn't try. Where he tries to save the kid and fails.
Yeah. That was the other bit that made me cry.
Yeah.
The magic school is entirely boys only.
Mm-hmm.
It's the whole thing, and there's definitely like there's an attitude of like women's magic is different and it's lesser, and they might know a few true names, but none of the important ones.
Yeah.
In which Granny Weatherwax rolls up her sleeves, marches between the universes, and starts punching people.
It's kind of like, on that note, it's like one of the things I loved about Wheel of Time was it did flip that on its head. Like the women had all the power and the men didn't. And I think, I don't know if it's, I guess, would that be a product of its time, or is that
No, so it's a product of this is Sparrowhawk's story.
Yeah.
And this is a world which is patriarchal, and
we'll get to the kick-ass women later.
Yes, but this is artificial. There's nothing. I don't think there's anything in the actual magic system of this world that divides by gender in the same way that the Wheel of Time magic divides. I think it's all one magic, and it's
societal. It's a social model of sexism.
Yeah, they just missed like other types of magic users, like wandering mages and weather workers. Like they occasionally disparage them as well, and I think it's the same thing of like they just haven't been trained, and we are refusing to train women, so there are no women who are great sorcerers.
Yeah.
I kind of thought of it. I looked at especially the way that they disparage, like, I don't know, weather workers or like healers and stuff. It's this sort of like pure versus applied almost
A little
kind of
bit,
thing,
yeah.
where it's like, well, you're like using your weather work to help people sail, and that's practical, and so it's kind of like looked down a little bit because it's, you're for absolutely like no actual justifiable reason, right? But it's
I think there's a tiny bit of justification in the whole like balance thing, and the idea that these people might be calling a bit of disbalance.
but that's
and
why
chaos.
they should be trained,
you know
right?
what?
Yeah.
This is another thing that is reminding me of, and I'm assuming Pratchett did read this probably, but like the whole like the wizards versus witches thing in Discworld, where the difference isn't so much gender as it is the wizards are like, we like to do pure, what is like occasionally basically, particle physics, but like we do big powerful stuff just for the lols, for the educational purity of it or whatever, and occasionally we rip holes in dimensions and let the dungeon creatures in, and the witches
which is exactly what Ged does.
Yeah, so they fuck with the balance, essentially. They're the only ones really with the power to do it. And the witches are too sensible to use magic most of the time.
Yeah.
Because you can like literally rip holes in dimensions if you do it wrong. And they're like, actually, most of what we do is, cutting people's toenails when they can't reach them, and making sure that their wells are clean and all of that. And you get that same kind of rivalry of like, we are the highfalutin, upper class, well-educated.
Sort of reminds me also of like this snobbery of, oh well, I'm like a specific kind of surgeon at the hospital and you're just a general practitioner or something. It's like actually like,
doctors versus nurses even.
Yeah, I think it is. I like that it's like complex and it feels a bit more, because it's like, as fun as the Terry Pratchett witches versus wizards thing is, I feel like the situation in Earthsea feels more. It feels more real. It's like, yes, you could see how people would come up with the system and think, oh yeah, this means that women can't do magic.
Yeah.
And also not, and they're not entirely wrong about how magic works, and that these people might be doing things wrong, but it's not. it is mostly for lack of knowledge, not for like lack of desire to do the correct thing.
Yeah, I do think it's different, and I think a lot of the thing with Pratchett is that like, well, he was even from the beginning, where even though we tell people not to read Colour of Magic and whatever, he was a very good writer from the beginning, but he did start very much from a place of, I am satirizing existing things, and that means a lot of the strengths of his later writing and the systems, like the societies that we see and the structures and all of that, aren't necessarily like, they're built on that foundation, whereas I think you get the impression with Earthsea that like she had a fairly complete idea of what she was doing to start with, and that is reflected in the world building potentially.
But if you read this book and you're like, where are the women, just go read Tombs of Atuan.
Okay.
Yeah,
the next one.
that's the next one, and it's great, and it has I think the protagonist the whole way through is a girl. I can't remember if
it's been so long since I read
at any
it.
point. Yeah.
But I am going to go and read them in fairly short order.
I think the farthest shore then has a different protagonist again. I think that's the young prince, but then you've got
Tahanu,
which is possibly the best of the books, but relies on you at least having read the first two.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think the other thing about the gender stuff in this book, I think, is that for me at least, it bothered me a little less because of, I can't remember where it is in my edition, but it was talking about how the idea for the story came from her wanting to work out how you got from like a normal kid to that stereotypical, quiet, slightly forbidding, grey-bearded, old, powerful dude who, speaks in mysterious riddles and tries to say, how do you get from that to Gandalf?
Yeah.
And for me, it's not quite as, it's not satirizing in the same way, but it is kind of going, we have an idea of what a wizard is.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
How would that in a sort of three-dimensional, interesting world, how would that come about?
Let's pick that up and turn it around and look at all the angles of it. And
What's
and
I think
interesting
that is
about
behind a lot of the decisions where, there aren't women at the magic school. And, I think a lot of the places where we don't, we'd want to see women and we don't, I think, are because of the way she's consciously engaging with,
existing work.
That specific cultural image of a wizard, maybe. But yeah.
But yeah, and I do like the fact, I kind of like the fact that most of the women are awful.
Yeah.
Need space and fantasy for awful women. Yes, please. And this is one of the great things about Discworld, obviously, is that just in the characters of the three witches, like Nanny Ogg, Granny Weatherwax, and Magrat, you have such a wealth of flaws and strengths. And yeah. I also want to read, what's the Ursula Guin where she said that she would have written it with they pronouns, but she actually used she?
The Dispossessed, I think.
I've heard that's miserable.
Left Hand of Darkness. Sorry,
okay,
Left Hand of Darkness.
I did, yeah.
The Dispossessed is the space communism. The Left Hand of Darkness is the aliens who can swap sex, I guess would be the best way of describing it, but also swap gender as they swap sex. And I think she uses she all the way through, but would have used they.
Oh, speaking of books we should read that do fun things with pronouns, Ancillary Justice. The main empire, their language only has she pronouns, so everybody gets she pronouns.
Yeah, it took me a while to work out what was going on.
I think I literally have it on my shelf.
It's really interesting. I really like what she does with it. Anyway, is there anyone we want to fight?
Oh.
The woman, the Seret. Silver, the woman who wants him to touch the evil stone. Although she's kind of a victim as well, I think.
Yeah, she does end up running away at the end, and
she ends up turning into a gull and getting eaten, I think.
Oh, did she? I can't remember. I must have missed that.
I think it says something about there was blood on the talons of the things that have been chasing her, and there was no gulls skimming ahead of them. Yeah.
It's another one of those very understated, like the moment when the Otak dies, and you're like, oh God, boy.
I can't talk about it.
But
I'm
then
too sad.
they go back to the body, just to rub it home.
He picks the body up from the snow. As I say, I did have to go and cuddle the cat. I was just too sad. I don't know if I would want to fight anyone, actually, to be honest.
Like Jasper feels like kind of obvious, but again, I don't. He's really not that bad.
Not fun. You're not going to get anything out of it.
I mean, would you not also want to then fight Ged? Is it?
Yeah.
Does he not deserve it just as much?
Once he's released the shadow, I don't particularly want to fight Ged. It's not like Speaking of magic systems based on names, I would fight Kvothe from Name of the Wind.
Oh yeah, we didn't even. We went through this
opportunity. Yeah.
We did this whole conversation about magic systems, and we didn't talk about Name of the Wind. But yes, yes.
Yeah, no, totally. We'd totally fight Kvothe.
We should.
Other
tell
people
you what,
in that story.
We should do Name of the Wind for season 2 of this podcast.
Oh, it's so long. Oh, it's so long. I've got to reread it. It's so long.
Because this is the last episode of this season, or rather, it's the last episode where we'll be reading a book for it. So yeah,
exciting times, friends.
Yeah. What else are we reading at this point? Although, actually, do we want to do the cat's rating first?
Yeah, we should do the cat's rating.
If we're counting the Otak as a cat.
Yes.
And all the tiny dragons.
Oh, that's true. Yes, there are dragons.
Yes, there are dragons.
Which, as we all know, are cats. There isn't a lot of stabbing.
There is a menacing shadow, though.
Yeah, she is, in fact, a menacing shadow.
Who follows Ged around.
Yeah.
And screams for wet food, right?
Yeah. Screams for soup and to be let in from things.
I feel like an
true.
8.5.
And then as soon as Ged is like, yes, I shall let you in, and goes towards it, it goes, nope, actually no.
It just buggers off.
Oh wait, I changed my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, 8.5 or a 9. I'm happy with either.
Yeah.
I feel like it's not... I mean, Temeraire we gave a straight 10, didn't we, actually? But, yeah, I feel like it's not quite up there with Temeraire.
No.
And just because we love it doesn't mean the cat would love it.
Yeah, that's the thing. I'm biased. I'm biased in my ratings because I enjoyed it so much. I'm trying to, round it up. Yeah. Right, what else is everybody reading?
As said, I just started Ancillary Justice.
Woo!
But I may have got distracted by the 5th Temeraire book because that also arrived. So...
Fair enough.
Reading that, and then I'm listening to an audio book which is called Those Whose Names Are Unknown, which is a novel, a long hidden novel about the dust storms during the Great Depression, which is a bit of history I know very little about. So that's quite interesting.
Okay, that's cool.
That's cool.
I have some books that are overdue from the library, so I'm going to be reading those before I return them. So that I don't renew them and start the cycle all over again. And so I'm going to start with Chavs by Owen Jones, which is the demonisation of the working class in the UK.
Serious business.
Yeah. My journey of self-improvement. Also, Owen Jones is just great. So,
I mean, I spent the last week or so avoiding reading Earthsea because my brain decided it was homework for some reason, and ploughing my way through every Lord Peter Wimsey novel that I could get my hands on. So that's where I was at. And then the only thing that stopped my rampage was the fact that I got to Strong Poison, which is where Harriet Vane, who is my favourite literary character of all time, was introduced. And I was like, what if I just skip to all the books that have Harriet Vane in and I ignore the rest of them, as I do every single time. So that was fun. Yeah, that was pretty much where I was at. Oh, and I was working my way through, I have most of the Murderbot Diaries on Kindle, so I was working my way through those again. They're very funny. I love them a lot. Everybody should go read them. It's like, the premise is, Cyborg hacks their governor module so that they can watch TV instead of doing their job, as a Murderbot, as they do security for humans. And they're like, I could, with my newfound freedom, go anywhere and do anything, but what I will actually do is half-ass my job and watch soap operas. And I'm just like, I love this for you. Excellent. And it's kind of like their sort of journey to, finding humans that they actually like and working out what they actually want to do with their free will and all of that stuff, but, just very, very funny, sarcastic narrator. Yeah, it's good. And it's also, very, I guess, very queer. In that, they're a cyborg. Oh, it's a cyborg. Sorry, I'm misgendering it. It uses it pronouns, and just completely uninterested in romance or sex or any of that shit. And dealing with having relationships with other humans and other robots and what that looks like, and it's just good. It's a good time.
How about you, Lottie? Have you been reading things, or have you been so swamped by life?
Just life. No, I've been continuing listening to Stardust on audiobook, which
excellent.
I rewatched the film with my friend. I had a friend round, guys. I had an actual human in the flesh. It was very strange.
Not an actual human.
And we watched Stardust because it's when you just want to watch a film that's just chilled.
Yeah,
and
just a nice cozy film.
And I just forgot that the guy who plays Daredevil is in that film. But anyway, so yeah, I'm continuing listening to...
Oh yeah, I always forget
continuing listening to Stardust. Yeah, that's it really. Just that and sleeping. And eating cake.
It's a good life. It's a good life. It's a way to live.
Basically my life right now.
All right, so housekeeping.
Yeah.
This is the last episode of this season. We are taking a little break.
Little summer holiday.
Although it's not strictly the last episode of the season, we are going to do a Q&A episode in a little while, scheduled TBC. If you have questions that you would like for us to answer with our voices and our talking and our ramblings, please let us know.
Yeah.
If there's anyone you think we should have fought that we forgot to fight, please let us know.
And,
that would be a fun
also,
discussion.
send us DMs on Instagram, because I'm putting the questions on the Instagram as well. People are asking us questions, and I am collating them for this episode. So, fear not.
Excellent.
FYI, definitely do the Instagram and the email. I am in charge of the Twitter, and I never check it.
I do check the Tumblr, but I'm like bad at it.
No.
Yeah, like the Instagram, you'll get a reply pretty quickly. The Twitter, it's like 5 to 7 working days.
I mean, to be fair, like I have got so many books that I've added to my list because of Bookstagram, and just like people taking really good aesthetic photos of books. And they make really pretty photos.
We've got a cat, though.
We have got a cat. I do.
We're winning.
Cat photos do go on there. And a video the other week. But yeah, send us questions.
She is a very good girl.
And I mean, to be honest, in general, if you've enjoyed the series so far, please like share it amongst your bookstagram bookish friends. What is my life? And just like family, friends, some random person you met on the street, whack a sticker on a light pole so people can find our podcast, whatever you feel like.
If you get a book from the library that we've covered, just like put a little bit of paper in there and say, if you like this book.
Bring back the don't forget to be awesome leaving notes in library books situation.
Are we going to be the next like Frodo isn't dead thing?
Become a meme.
Frodo lives, yeah.
That'd be amazing.
But yeah, we will be back with a Q&A episode, and then season 2 after this, after that, and we do already have lots of books that we want to do.
Such a long list.
We have the world's
such a
longest list, but we also will continue taking your recommendations, because just in general, like even if the
list could always be longer, right?
A, the list can always be longer, and B, we will always just take recommendations. I mean, me personally, I've started reading a number that I found that people have recommended.
Like I read them even if we don't do them for the podcast. Like it's like I rub my gay little hands all over them. I'm like yes, put that on my book list.
Yeah, no, it's great. And and also if you do like our podcast, please consider giving us a review on your platform. I think the major ones are Apple Podcasts and Podcast Addict. If you're on either of those, pretty sure Apple Podcasts you can do it anonymously or use a pseudonym. Is that the right word?
Yep.
There we go. So you don't have to have like your email, because I know that can sometimes be a bit of a worry. Like, is it my email? No, it's not. You can have a fake name.
We're big on anonymity. I can't say anonymity. We're big on anonymity in this podcast.
My favourite pseudonym is Pseudonymous Bosch, by the way. free to use, courtesy of me.
But yeah, like it really does help. I mean, it means that also like the algorithms like us, but also it means that if people are looking for our podcast and they read the reviews and they think, oh, okay, I vibe with this review, then they might consider listening to the podcast, and you've helped that. So we thank you for I think 3, 4. I think there's 3. There's definitely 3 on Apple Podcasts. I definitely found that on the online. So that's exciting. Thank you to all 3 people. Maybe there'll be more by the time this goes out. Maybe there'll be a 4th. And also, follow us on our Instagram, Twitter, Tumblr, Goodreads, Pinterest.
Yeah, follow the Tumblr.
Yeah, follow the Tumblr. It's great.
The Tumblr is great.
Tumblr is really good. It's like got summaries of all the things that we talked about and like references. Like when we reference things, and then Em goes and hunts down like the link and sources, everything.
It's the only academia I get these days.
I was going to say, you can tell they're an academic.
Yeah, you can tell, and it's great.
I'm going to add those as like cards on the YouTube versions of these episodes over the break.
Nice,
that is like high on my to-do list.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, and we're on YouTube as well. So you can, if you want to embed it.
You may be listening to this on YouTube.
Yeah, you
Who
might
knows?
be. But if you can embed it in your webpage, you can embed it on Spotify. Many ways to share it if you so chose. Don't have to. We're not forcing you, but it's nice. And then tell us, because then it makes us happy, and like shout about it in our WhatsApp
all
group.
these things, and I'm just sitting here doing the like Durba fire is scary and Thomas Edison was a witch thing about it. So many of these technologies, I'm just like, I don't know what this is. This is frightening to me.
We need the technology, because otherwise I'd have to actually get up at 10 a.m. on a Sunday to release the podcast.
Yeah. It allows us to
I'm just so grateful that we have people on the team who actually understand it and aren't just standing there going, Thomas Edison was a witch, because where would we be?
I mean, Google is my friend with Pinterest. I'm like, I set that up, and that's a whole new ballgame.
Pinterest is the
Pinterest
is the Wild West.
Yeah, we have a Pinterest.
Oh my god, why do we have a Pinterest?
Yeah.
The only thing I know about Pinterest is that it's tricked my sister into wanting to make her own paper.
I'm not quite, although it does say on our analytics, fun fact, if you have a Pinterest, please tell us if I'm just doing the completely wrong like marketing scheme, but our highest audience proportion is something like finance, and I'm pretty sure we're not aimed at the finance audience.
We're an audio medium. Why do we have a Pinterest?
Lads, we may have gone a bit off topic.
Well, tune into our next session, and you can hear lots more of this.
Yeah, you can ask us on the Q&A, and we will probably ramble for ages and ages about all such fun things. So please like, subscribe, review. Send us an email, teachingmycattoread@gmail.com, the 2 being a TO. Add hello there so we know you're not spam. Thank you all so much for listening and reading and reviewing and just generally being awesome. We love you all so much. I could give you all a virtual hug right now. And recommend us some books, big virtual hugs, and we'll see you in our next episode for our Q&A. Bye.
Bye.